17 Augustus 1950. Noon, heat. Bound Americans are herded into a dry gully on Hill 303 above Waiguan, and hear the metallic cough of PPS-41 burp guns. The first burst rips dust off the slope. Men fold over the ropes on their wrists. A corporal feels warm blood pouring down his sleeve and presses his face into the earth to play dead. 41 U.S. prisoners are executed, where they kneel, shot in the back, hands tied. 4 or 5 survive by hiding under their friends. The ground smells like oil and hot brass. The sound is the short, brutal bark of Soviet guns and the hiss of summer cicadas refusing to stop. The bodies settle. The hill is still. Then, the American answer starts to climb the slope. Here is the American answer. Attack, anyway. Artillery from the 61st Field Artillery Battalion and tanks from the 70th Tank Battalion pound the hill, while infantry of the 5th Cavalry Regiment claws back ground. A napalm strike hisses across the crest at 14. The North Korean guards feel US steel closing and rush the execution rather than risk a rescue. That choice proves the point. Our momentum does not pause for atrocities, it accelerates to end them. When the smoke clears, survivors crawl out and start telling names and units through split lips. One GI whispers, "Don't move." He slides a canteen under a second man's chin to keep it from rattling against rock. They wait for dark, then belly crawl through burnt grass until the glow of American tracers shows the safe direction. Those who make it out bring more than grief. They bring evidence, names for graves, and a story that will bend policy in Washington. The shock on Hill 303 becomes the spark for a national vow. We do not execute prisoners. We do not abandon our own. The enemy's shock is different. The massacre should have bought time. Instead, artillery and air made the hill unholdable within hours. The North Korean troops learn in one savage afternoon that American logistics can attack and rescue at once, that our radios call fire with a speed that makes hostage-taking pointless. The lesson spreads down the line like a rumor that will not die. Killing captives will not slow the United States. It will harden it. The bridge to what comes next is simple and loud. Burp guns tried to erase witnesses. American air and artillery kept them alive long enough to talk. From this ravine, follow the column north. The worst march of the war is starting, and Americans will answer it with something no dictatorship can match, a nation that moves sky, rail, and hospital as one to bring its people home. The road ahead runs past rice paddies and rail lines, past villages where the smell of smoke and millet hang in the air. Boots will burst, and canteens will run dry. Yet the same radios that called fire on Hill 303 will guide aircraft and medics toward the broken. This is the hinge. From a ravine full of bodies to a sky full of help, and a promise that grows teeth. The column staggers north under a dry, cutting wind. A North Korean major the prisoners call the Tiger hears there are sick men and older civilians in the line and barks the order everyone remembers. Let them march until they die. Boots chew through blisters. Canteens go light. The road pulses with dust and coughs. Americans start rotating loads without being told, passing the heaviest packs from shoulders that are about to quit to shoulders that still have a little left. One private with split lips repeats a simple vow. One more ridge, then one more. Numbers make the horror real. Men drop and do not rise. Others are shot as an example. At narrow bridges, guards swing rifle butts to speed the weak. A sergeant counts quietly to keep his breath even and to keep his squad together. 4, 5, 6. The cadence becomes a shield. They memorize names as they move, because names are what the killers want to erase. When a man goes down for the last time, 2 buddies tear a strip from a field jacket and scratch his name and unit on it with a pencil stub, then tuck it into his pocket before the column shoves them on. Here is the American way inside the misery. A corporal breaks a corn cob into 6 pieces. A medic pulls a needle from his fatigues and drains a blister so a man can keep moving. They trade boots by size. They shoulder each other's weight without speeches, because this is what Americans do. The tiger wants the column to fragment into terrified animals. It turns instead into a line of small deals and stubborn favors. This is not pretty. It is efficient, and it works. There is another clock running that the guards cannot hear. US units to the south are regaining momentum. Aircraft are stenciling new targets onto grease pencils. Rail lines ahead will soon be cut. The march that was meant to be a weapon becomes a fuse. When the column reaches a railhead, men can smell creosote and coal smoke and feel the boards of boxcars turn under their feet. Guards promise food and treatment farther north. The words sound like water to a thirsty brain. The enemy's shock is coming, and they are the last to know it. They planned to break bodies and bury stories along a road. Instead, the Americans carry the stories forward intact. Who fell where, who helped whom, who gave away the last edible scrap. The prisoners have turned memory into a weapon. They cannot fire it yet, but they will. The bridge out of this chapter is a tunnel mouth cut into rock, and a lie told with a smile. The killers say, "Get down, planes." The prisoners obey. Hope rises for a heartbeat, as if safety were a door on the other side of the darkness. Then the guns begin, and everything changes. What the guards do not know is that American parachutes are already being packed, manifest cards already typed, chalk numbers already chalked on boots. The sky is getting ready to answer the road, the 30th of October 1950. The train squeals to a halt near the Sunshon Tunnel. Guards order the prisoners to crouch because planes are coming. Heads go down, hearts lift for a moment. Then the burp guns open. The rock ballast sprays like rain. 68 Americans are cut down where they kneel. 21 men are found alive. 2 will die after rescue. A survivor later says the trick was not to move even when the next man fell across your shoulders. The smell is cordite and coal smoke. The sound is the short, vicious burst that makes silence feel like mercy. 10 days earlier, the sky made its own promise. On October 20, the 187th Regimental Combat Team paratroopers called Rakasans dropped near Sukchon and Sunchon from C-119 flying boxcars and C-47 Skytrains. Doors banged open. Green lights popped. Sticks shuffled and stepped into the slipstream, with rifles slung and ankles taped. The mission order was interdiction and seizure of key nodes, but every man understood the unprinted line, "Find our POWs." They cut rails, blew culverts, cleared towns, and started a hunt that would not stop when the maps ran out. Rescue is not a single act, it is a chain. Scouts who hear rumors, locals who point with a glance, patrols who push a little farther after dark, medics who carry morphine syrets in breast pockets and count their last 2. When American patrols reach the bodies near the tunnel, they also reach the living. A paratrooper slips a canteen under a head and says, "You're safe now." It is not poetry, it is a schedule. Trucks to aid stations to airstrips, airstrips to hospitals. The enemy's shock looks like an empty timetable. They thought the killing would erase the witnesses and cover tracks. Instead, survivors tell interrogators times, names, faces, and which units guarded them. The massacre meant to hide the crime becomes the map that exposes it. Dictatorships always underestimate what free men can do together in a hurry. Here, the surprise wears jump boots and carries a folding stretcher. There is a question hanging over the scene like smoke. How do you get shattered men from a killing ground to safety before infection wins? The revelation is American throughput, C-47 seconds and C-54. Skymasters churn the air between Korea and Japan, turning hours into salvation. Surgeons meet litters with practiced hands. Paperwork runs faster than pain. The machine is not cold. It is warm and relentless. It is how a republic does triage at theatre scale. The bridge forward is a clipboard and a clock. Names go onto manifests. Engines turn. The same system that dropped paratroopers onto rail lines now lifts survivors off them. The next chapter is about what happens when that system grows to continental size and starts bringing thousands home by the book. Before the week is out, some of the rescued men will wake under bright lights in wards at Itazuke or Osaka, bandages clean, sheets white, a bowl of rice steaming on a tray. One looks at a nurse and says, "I thought you were angels." She smiles and checks his pulse and tells him his name out loud so he can hear that he still has one. That is what America sounds like after a massacre. The formation looks endless from the ground. Cone 119 seconds and C-47 seconds drone north, wings steady, paratroopers sitting on benches with reserve chutes digging into ribs and chalk numbers scribbled on helmets. At the green light, the 187th RCT stands, hooks up, and steps into October air over the Sukchon-Sunchon corridor. Silk flashes, risers bite, boots hit paddies and roads. Pathfinders, pop panels and radios squawk alive. Squads swing to rail cuts and roadblocks, blowing culverts with Composition C and setting security on junctions. A lieutenant checks a map board on his knee and draws an arrow toward the next village. American dominance is not just bravery, it is integration. The airborne hammer times its blows with the 8th Army's ground advance and the Royal Australian Regiment's dash at Yongyu, the pieces locking together like gears. Commonwealth infantry links with American paratroopers in smoky streets, an Australian platoon commander and a US jump officer trading a handshake beside a burning truck. In a dictatorship, coordination depends on fear. In a free army, it depends on trust and drills, and standard parts that fit. Radios match. Procedures match. The tempo climbs. The human element is a single paratrooper who keeps one pocket for morphine and one for peppermint. He gives the candy to a dazed prisoner before he gives the shot. The man's hands shake so hard the wrapper rattles. The medic laughs once, quick and kind, and says, "Easy, buddy, you're home." Later, he will write that the only thing louder than the engines was the feeling of doing the job America trained him to do. The enemy's shock comes from speed. Rail lines that felt safe at dawn are useless by dusk. Bridges that promised escape at noon are rubble by nightfall. Columns that moved by darkness find themselves flushed into daylight by roadblocks and patrols that seem to appear out of thin air. Execution squads realize the problem late. You cannot race a nation that moves by air. The bridge into the next phase is measured in paperwork, not explosions. Once the rescues start, the system widens. Aid stations tag litters, field hospitals stabilize, airfields schedule serials, and then the thing nobody believes until they see it begins. Exchanges, thousands of them, run like a factory of mercy with clipboards, chow lines, bandages, and planes. The numbers will sound impossible, but they are plain. When Operation Little Switch starts in April 1953, the first day alone sees 14 Americans in one group and 16 inches the next, alongside allies counted to the last man. By the end, 149 Americans sick and wounded are back. When Operation Big Switch begins on the 5th of August 1953, the scale is something only the United States could manage. 12,773 United Nations Command POWs repatriated, including 3,597 Americans, processed, screened, fed, and flown. It feels like fiction until you hold the manifests and see the stamps and signatures that make it real. Wire gates swing open on the 20th of April 1953, and fresh paint shines on the exchange point signs because the details matter. Operation Little Switch begins with a schedule tight enough to set a watch by. 14 Americans in the first group, 16 inches the second, plus allies listed by nation, every line on the page squared off. Over days, the count reaches its final, exact number 149 Americans sick and wounded, brought across, examined, fed, deloused, and placed on manifests. Clipboards slap against flight suits, C-54, Sky Masters idle like patient giants, while medics run litters to ramps. The routine is a revelation, mercy that moves at scale. Then the lever moves to full throw. On the 5th of August 1953, Operation Big Switch starts. And the figures rewrite what people think a democracy can do in war's wake. By the time the last bus rolls, 12,773 United Nations Command POWs are repatriated, including 3,597 Americans, and the flow looks like a river. Processing tents smell like disinfectant and coffee. Interrogators ask careful questions because facts now build cases. Doctors weigh men and write numbers: 128 pounds on arrival, 145 a week later, 160 by month's end, proof that abundance can be a weapon. The human element is a small kindness multiplied by thousands. A logistics officer pockets stick gum to hand out at the gate. A nurse warms a stethoscope in her palm so it does not shock a chest gone thin. A chaplain reads names out loud so they do not sound like statistics. A paratrooper who once jumped into Sukchon now carries the litter of a man from Suncheon and thinks, this is what the jump was for. In the mess, a cook lifts the lid on a steel pan, and the smell of eggs and coffee floats into the tent. Someone laughs for the first time in years. The enemy's shock is political. Propaganda promised that American prisoners were broken and ashamed. The exchange lines show the opposite. Men who endured, men who memorized, men who returned home to testify. The sheer competence of it becomes a weapon in itself. Cameras roll. Families watch trains slide into stations. Around conference tables far away, the decision-makers who once used murder as a tactic learn that the tactic has failed. The bridge to the next chapter is an oath printed on white paper and a date to remember. What happened to our prisoners will be turned into a creed. A nation that can move thousands with mercy can also harden the mind for the next time. The pen is already uncapped, and the wording is already exact. In the quiet between serials, a veteran quotes the line he wants his son to learn: "I will never surrender of my own free will." The words are not yet official, but everyone knows they fit what they have just seen. The system gives more than food, it gives back identity. Men sign their names with steady hands and feel the weight of a dog tag sit right again on the chest. The last plane of the day lifts, and runway lights blur in heat haze. A colonel checks the tally board and nods once because the math is righteous. America has turned compassion into throughput and throughput into power. When the guns go quiet, America sharpens the mind. On the 17th of August 1955, President Dwight D. Eisenhower signs Executive Order 10631, the Code of Conduct, and every sentence sounds like it was hammered on an anvil. I am an American fighting man. I serve in the forces which guard my country and our way of life. That is Article 1. Simple, proud, exact. Article 2 promises, I will never surrender of my own free will. If in command, I will never surrender the members of my command while they still have the means to resist. Article 3 turns survival into a method. If I am captured, I will continue to resist by all means available. I will make every effort to escape and aid others to escape. The creed fits the facts Americans lived, and it bends futures none of us can see. The numbers that follow are brutal and true. More than 7,100 Americans were captured in Korea. Just over 2,700 died in captivity, about 38%, the highest rate in our military's modern history. Those are not abstractions. They are empty chairs and old letters and the weight of a folded flag. But they are also the reason the United States built rescue into operations, built exchanges into diplomacy, and built memory into policy. The code is the opposite of a slogan. It is a tool. The human element keeps the statistics human. A veteran of Camp 5, Pyeongtaung, sits before a class of recruits and taps the page where Article 3 is printed. If anyone walks out of a camp alive, he says, let it be you, and make sure you help the next guy. He tells them about frostbitten feet, stale cornmeal, and the day a Pathfinder's panel flashed like a sign from home. He quotes the chaplain who taught them to repeat names so they would not forget themselves. He does not raise his voice. He does not need to. The enemy's shock comes in two waves. First comes the realization that executions and marches did not erase the witnesses. The men came home and told what they saw at Hill 303 and Suncheon in dates and units and names that stand up under questioning. Second comes the fact that the United States turned that pain into a permanent advantage. The next time captors try to coerce prisoners, they find the baseline has moved. Minds are pre-committed. Hearts are braced. The chapter closes with a sum that sounds impossible until you say it slowly. The same America that watched 41 men executed in a ravine built an airborne rescue chain, flew shattered soldiers to hospitals in hours, repatriated 149 inches, Little Switch, and 3,597 inches, Big Switch, and then wrote a 6-article creed to make future captives stronger. From blood in dust to ink on paper, nothing was wasted. This is what a free country does when it decides not to lose twice. One more figure belongs on the board because it carries our promise forward. Identification never stops. Decades after the armistice, the national mission continues naming the fallen, including new identifications in recent years from remains tied to the tunnel killings. Families answer phones. Ceremonies place rosettes by names once marked missing. A republic that keeps the ledger open like that is dangerous to fight and powerful to follow. It tells allies that we do not forget. It tells enemies that time is not their ally. Rotors thump the valley and change the math of dying. An H-13 Sioux, what the GIs call a flying grasshopper, drops onto a scarred rice paddy, with its skids flexing and its litter pods clamped to the struts. A corpsman in a steel pot helmet slides a wounded private into the right pod, taps his shoulder, and the pilot lifts into a wash of dust that tastes like clay. Minutes later, the helicopter kisses down beside a tent with a red cross painted big as a truck, and hands move faster than fear. Scalpels flash. Morphine caps click. The smell is iodine, canvas, and hope. In World War II, evacuation could take days by jeep, ambulance, and rail. In Korea, the United States builds a sky bridge that moves the hurt in hours, sometimes in under 60 minutes. Over the course of the war, helicopters carry more than 20,000 wounded off the battlefield, and the survival rate for men who reach a mobile army surgical hospital hovers around 97%. It is not a boast, it is a baseline. The human element is simple and fierce. A pilot in a wool shirt and dark gloves writes the word urgent on a strip of tape and sticks it to a soldier's chest rig where he can see it. "You're first," he says, and the man nods because pain makes speech too expensive. A nurse warms a stethoscope in her palm so it will not shock a rib cage gone thin. A surgeon in a blood-flecked apron says, "We're going to get you home," and means it. The soldier squeezes his hand and whispers, "Tell my squad," and the surgeon answers, "You can tell them yourself." The enemy feels the shift like a lost wager. Execution squads and forced marches were meant to turn wounds into graves and witnesses into silence. Instead, Americans fly the injured out fast enough to testify with names, dates, and places that stand up on paper. A dictatorship never counts on its victims returning with paperwork. A free country plans for it. The shock is not loud. It is relentless. Every helicopter that lifts off says the same sentence in a different way. We do not leave our people behind, and we do not let them die for lack of speed. The bridge to what comes next is a ledger and a warehouse door rolling up at dawn. Airlift without supply is just hope. America mates rotors to railheads, field depots to hospital ships, and C-54 Skymasters to schedules that do not slip. Gauze in bales, plasma in crates, diesel by the drum and coffee by the sack. A corporal signs for a pallet with cold fingers and a stub pencil, and a clerk stamps the form with a purple block that still smells like ink. The machine is not heartless. It is caring at scale. The next chapter steps into that warehouse and follows a single box of medical dressings from a stateside factory to a cot in a tent by the Yalu, proving that kindness can move like freight when a republic decides it must. Forklifts beep under bare bulbs in a dockside shed at Yokohama, while rain drums the roof like boots. A crate stenciled dressings. Surgical slides from pallet to boxcar, headed north to the airfield where C-54 Skymasters idle with cargo doors yawning like mouths. In the United States, a factory foreman watches a clock and calls for another run at the press. In Japan, a quartermaster checks a manifest against a bill of lading. In Korea, a sergeant at a forward depot cuts banding straps with a bayonet and grins at the sight of what his medics begged for. This is not luck. It is planning. The Military Sea Transportation Service, Far East Air, Forces, Combat, Cargo, and 8th Army Logistics fuse into a single pipeline that treats mercy like ammunition, measured, moved, and delivered on time. The numbers make the point cleaner than adjectives. Little Switch returns 149 American. Sick and wounded in April 1953. Big Switch returns 3,597 Americans starting the 5th of August 1953. 12,773 United Nations Command POWs in all cross the line to freedom. Those are not round guesses. They are inked totals on forms, stamped, signed, and filed. The human element is a private named only by his tag number until a clerk reads his name out loud at a processing tent. First, middle, last, hometown. He blinks like someone turned on a light. Say it again, he asks, and the clerk does, smiling, because saying names is part of the job. A cook hands him a tray that smells like eggs, toast, and coffee. He sits, cup warm in both hands, and feels the tremor in his fingers fade as muscle remembers plenty. A medic lines up men for penicillin and checks dog tags one more time. The click of metal against metal sounding like a clock keeping good time again. The enemy learns a lesson they never wanted. Scale can be moral. All the posters and loudspeakers that promised America would fail look small against schedules that keep promises. Guards who once barked orders at columns now watch buses roll and understand that the rumors were true. This nation is dangerous because it cares, and because it can prove it. Kindness becomes a statistic that scorches. The bridge forward is policy written with the same exactness as a packing list. America will codify what it expects of its fighters, and what fighters can expect of America. The Code of Conduct is coming, a 6-article creed signed on the 17th of August 1955 that distills everything the pipeline just did into sentences a private can carry in his head when everything else has been stripped away. Before the ink dries, instructors will read it to recruits, and veterans will nod once, slow, because the words fit the facts. The next chapter opens that paper and turns each article into a scene the way a mechanic turns a checklist into a flying aircraft. The page lies flat on a wooden desk, edges curling in summer humidity. I am an American fighting man. The line begins. Clean as a rifle bore. I will never surrender of my own free will. The voice reading it is steady, a career vet with frost scars on his ears and a habit of checking doors. He tells the class what a propaganda session felt like in Camp 5 at Pyeongtaung, the questions, the threats, the promise of extra millet if a prisoner will sign a fake statement, and then he taps Article 3. If I am captured, I will continue to resist by all means available. He explains resistance in plain terms. Keep rank structure, memorize names, refuse to inform, tell the truth when truth helps, and keep silent when it hurts. It is not hero talk. It is a manual. The human element is Richard M. Bassett's vow in the dark. If anyone walks out of this camp alive, it will be me. He uses that sentence like a tool, spreading it to the man on his left, then to the man on his right, until a barracks full of bones stands up inside and decides to outlast winter. A chaplain leads a whisper roll call, after lights out so the guards cannot hear. A corporal scratches Bible verses on a slat with a nail and covers them with his hand when footsteps pass. They are building a wall no cudgel can see. The enemy's shock arrives slowly, then all at once. Interrogators expect men to collapse into useful mouthpieces. Instead, they hit a code set in advance, a standard that makes their tricks predictable and their threats less effective. Even the small wins crumble. Promises of extra rations do not buy confessions because squads share food. Fear can isolate. It cannot split a unit that keeps its ranks in whispers and hand squeezes. The revelation at the end is that Creed Plus capacity changes outcomes. Helicopters and hospitals saved bodies. The code saved coherence. Together they turned a population. The enemy tried to break into a witness that could stand up in courts and Congress. America did not claim perfection. It built a system to do better next time, and then it trained to that system like lives depended on it because they did. The bridge into the payoff is a phone ringing decades after the guns fell silent. A woman answers and hears a careful voice say, "Ma'am, we believe we have identified your uncle from remains recovered in North Korea." Science has joined the creed and the pipeline. The defense POW divided by MIA accounting mission does not end when the ink fades on the forms. It keeps breathing. The next chapter walks with a family to a ceremony where a rosette goes beside a name once marked missing, and where statistics turn back into a single, specific American coming home. A summer sun glints on polished stone, and a niece runs her fingers along letters cut into granite until she stops at the one that matters to her. Beside it, a small bronze rosette waits in a velvet tray. A uniformed officer reads a citation, and a DPAA scientist explains how teeth, bone, and DNA built a bridge no river or border could stop. The family listens to the timeline, how remains linked to the Suncheon area were recovered, how analysis in a quiet lab matched them to a boy who once pitched on a dusty field behind an Iowa school, and the sound around them changes. Birds keep singing. Feet shift. Someone's breath catches. This is the opposite of a ravine emptied by gunfire. It is a circle closing. The human element is a folded flag and a voice that shakes on the third word, then steadies. "Welcome home," the sister says, and her husband nods because there is nothing smarter to add. A chaplain reads a psalm, not long, and the bagpipes answer from a lawn that smells like cut grass and summer heat. A young soldier who never knew Korea stands at attention and thinks, "This is why the helicopters flew and the manifests were right, and the code is on the wall of my barracks." The old men in the second row straighten because they recognize the look on his face. The enemy's shock echoes even here. Executions were supposed to bury stories so deep that nothing could dig them up. Instead, a republic turned memory into a mission with no end date. Files stayed open, teams kept traveling, labs kept learning. The past did not get safer with age, it got more accurate. And the truth walked out in dress uniforms with white gloves. That is what it means when a nation says it will not forget and then proves it with names and dates that can be checked. The revelation that tops what came before is numerical and human at once. Those stamped totals: 149 Americans in Little Switch, 3,597 inches. Big Switch, 12,000. 773 United Nations Command POWs repatriated are not the end of the ledger. The ledger is alive. Every new identification adds a line that turns missing into home, and each line is a small, lawful victory over time and terror. That is not normal in history. It is American, on purpose. The bridge tightens the focus back to the battlefield. Because the story is not only about bringing people back, it is also about how the United States made resistance futile in the field by moving faster, striking deeper, and supplying better than any opponent could match. The closing chapters will put the numbers side by side. The sorties, the evacuations, the survival rates, and show how the same system that found men in a tunnel also crushed attempts to outrun it. The last act will feel impossible until the numbers make it ordinary. Engines start before dawn at an airstrip cut from Korean dirt, and the cold bites through gloves. A crew chief slaps the fuselage of a C-47 Skytrain, the Goonie bird that never seems to tire, and yells, "Manifest set!" Down the way, a heavier C-54. Skymaster rumbles like a freight train, and an H-13 Sioux skims in low, its bubble canopy flashing the first pink of morning. The day's plan fits on clipboards. Supply drops forward, medevac back, and an airborne blocking force ready to jump where rails still run. The rhythm is brutal and kind in the same hour. Bombs and bandages move on the same routes, guided by the same grease pencils and the same calm voices. The human element is a medic who counts his last 2 morphine syrettes with his thumb and then finds fresh vials in a newly arrived crate marked Yokohama Supply Unit 3. He laughs once, short, then goes back to work. A paratrooper tapes his ankles with friction tape and checks his reserve chute pin twice because he has learned that speed only works when the small things are right. A nurse pulls a blanket to a wounded man's chin and says, "This one's warm," and the man nods, eyes bright with pain and relief. The enemy feels the tempo as a kind of weather they cannot change. At dawn, a bridge stands. By noon, it's down. At dusk, a prison train departs. By midnight, the line is cut. Columns that want darkness get daylight, blasted onto them by roadblocks that bloom out of nowhere. Attempts to use prisoners as shields fail, because American units attack and rescue in parallel, not in sequence. A tactic built on slowing the opponent with horror cannot work when the opponent moves at aircraft speed and keeps a promise at the same pace. The revelation that crowns the chapter is a set of paired facts that do not look like they belong together until they do. The same war that saw the Suncheon Tunnel massacre also saw over 20,000 helicopter evacuations and survival rates near 97% in MASH units for men who got there. The United States built a system that could be terrible to its enemies and tender to its own, with no pause between the two. That is not contradiction. That is competence. The bridge into the finale is a scoreboard, written in real numbers, not slogans. Sorties flown, tons delivered, prisoners exchanged with exact counts and dates, articles of a code signed with a president's pen, names once missing, now present with rosettes beside them. The last chapter will stack these truths the way a supply sergeant stacks crates, square, tight, and ready, so when the door goes up, viewers can see what impossible looks like when America treats it like Tuesday. Start with the ravine on Hill 303 and end with a family hearing a name at a rosette ceremony, then lay the track between them with numbers you can hold. 41 Americans executed at Waiguan on the 17th of August, 1950, and still the United States attacked the hill that afternoon with artillery, tanks, and air because rescue and assault could run at once. Helicopters evacuated more than 20,000 wounded across the war, and men who reached MASH units survived at about 97%. Operation Little Switch returned exactly 149 Americans sick, and wounded in April 1,953. Operation Big Switch began on August 5, 1,953, and repatriated 12,773 United Nations Command POWs, including 3,597 Americans, all processed, screened, fed, and flown. On the 17th of August 1955, the President signed a 6-article code of conduct that told every future captive exactly how to stand fast. Decades later, the Defense POW divided by MIA mission is still adding names from Korean War remains, turning missing into home. The human thread stitches through every line item. A paratrooper of the 187th RCT steps out of a C-119 flying boxcar over Sukchon to cut rails that feed a prison train, then helps carry a survivor's litter to a C-47. A nurse warms a stethoscope, so the first thing a man feels in freedom is kindness. A pilot with a bubble canopy and a brave heart lifts off with one more life under plexiglass. A clerk reads a name at an exchange tent, and watches a man's shoulders drop with relief as identity returns like breath. A sister says, "Welcome home," beside polished stone, and a scientist in a white coat nods because science did part of the soldiers' last march. The enemy's lesson is clear. Murder could not buy time. Marches could not erase memory. Propaganda could not replace facts. A regime that counted on fear met a republic that counted everything: rounds, rations, cereals, souls, and moved faster than hate. That is why the tunnel became testimony. The march became a map, and the ravine became a reason. The payoff is not just pride, it is precedent. America proved that a free nation can be overwhelming in war and exact in mercy. That we can build a logistics machine big enough to move hope like freight, and a creed small enough to fit in a pocket in the dark. No other country in 1950 had that combination of airlift, medicine, industry, and moral will. We did. We still do. The last sound is the steady thrum of rotors fading toward a horizon that always needs watching, and the last sight is a ledger line turning from empty to full, from number to name, from loss to home. That is the math of a free nation. And it does not age.